Hello, this is Geraldine Wilkins, the Living Water Quilter and BERNINA Ambassador, and this is the Essential Ruler Quilting Challenge. We are in week number 4. Week 4, we concentrate on the Squiggle ruler in the BERNINA Essentials Ruler Kit. Let's look at one of the designs, ribbon. So this is the ribbon design, and it's made by stitching this side of the ruler and stitching it twice over the same area. We need to do a couple of things to make sure we consistently stitch the ribbon design. And one is we want to use not only the lines on the ruler, but we also want to use lines on our quilt sandwich. There are instructions on how to mark the quilt sandwich in preparation for stitching ribbon. Let's go over some of the things on the ruler. There are marks on the ruler that we can use to help us position the ruler in the right place. Sometimes it may be difficult to see those lines as we're stitching. That's when I use these repositionable arrows to help me reposition them to the location I need when I'm stitching out a particular design. There are two things that we have to do when we stitch the second part of the ribbon design, and that is the shifting of the ruler. When we stitch the first part of the ribbon design, we're using the reference line and the ruler will sit. This edge of the ruler will sit right next to the reference line we've marked on our quilt sandwich. So here's the marking that I have on my quilt sandwich. I'm going to position the ruler right next to the marked reference line on the quilt sandwich. I'm putting the edge of the curve right next to the edge of the reference line I've marked on the sandwich. You can see that 1/4 inch distance for that first line of stitching. And I'm going to start at the same place every single time. For the first line of stitching, when I do the second line, I also want to start on the same place on the ruler. But on the quilt sandwich, we're going to start in a different spot. Let me show you on a whiteboard that I've pre-marked. So we've drawn several reference lines on our quilt sandwich. We have a vertical reference line and we need 2 horizontal reference lines that are 1/4 inch apart. For the first stitching of the ribbon design, we want to place the ruler at the top line and we want to use this first position. There's a horizontal reference line on the ruler. It's hard to see on camera, but it's there. We want to place that on top of that top line. So that's our position right here for our ruler foot and for this line on the ruler. Then we're going to make sure these curves are right on the edge of the reference line. When we make the second line of stitching to create the ribbon, we have to shift the ruler in 2 directions. We want to shift it forward, and that's where the green arrows come in. I'm going to make sure that the green arrows line up with the vertical reference line on my quilt sandwich. So that's moving it forward. Then I want to shift it down 1/4 inch, and that's why we have 2 reference lines, horizontal reference lines. This is where our foot will start the second part of creating the ribbon design. Now, if you're looking at the ruler and you have it in your hand, there are a number of reference lines on the ruler. Let me see if I can hold it up just a little bit and maybe you can see. So right here we have 2 arcs that are the shape of the arc right here of the ruler. Then we have a horizontal line. That horizontal line is made up of two colors, white and red. The arrow is pointing to the third red mark on that horizontal line. So if I did not have these arrows, I would use that red mark and place it on top of the reference line on my quilt sandwich. It's kind of small, it's hard to see while you're quilting, so that's why I like to use the arrows. So on an actual quilt sandwich, that red might blend in. So when I want to stitch this design, the second part, I'm shifting forward and down. The first one was like this, with the edges along the reference line. Then I'm shifting forward until the green arrows meet up with the reference line I've marked on the quilt sandwich. Here, here, and here. But I still have to shift it down. I've shifted it forward, but now I need to shift it down, and that's the 1/4 inch distance. Now you can see, make sure that's lined up. Here is the stitching of the second time around. Notice right here that when you stitch the second time, that it will kiss the previous stitching, the first line of curvy stitching. When we stitch the second time, it will touch the first. This is an opportunity to use the measuring gauge or the spacing gauge before you stitch to make sure that you don't overlap or leave a gap. You want it to just touch, to kiss. And how you check that, and you'll see this in the video, is you take the spacing gauge and you look to see where is it going to touch. Right there. It's touching right there. And so I will run this over, and you'll see it in the video that it will not overlap, but instead it will touch. See how they touch instead of overlapping or leaving a gap. Let's take a look at the video. And I've stitched already the first pass. I call it the first pass. Notice how it started at the top horizontal line on the left, and the second one, I started a 1/4 inch down. There is a 1/4 inch shift downward from the first one on the left and the second one on the right. Those are the two passes of stitching. When you combine them, create the ribbon. So now I'm lining it up with the top line, horizontal line, and I'm putting the edge of the curves on the ruler on the vertical reference line on the quilt sandwich. Starting with the needle down, needle up, and then bringing up that bobbin thread, stitching a couple of stitches in place. And I started at the first horizontal line at the top. And then I'm going to stitch all the way to the bottom and break thread and start again. You don't reverse stitch in this, because you want to be able to position the ruler in the right location. So I'll break thread, and then I'll come and stitch over that area again to create the ribbon. But I'm going to shift the ruler. I need to shift it down 1/4 of an inch, and I need to shift it forward. And you see I'm pointing to those locations right now. You can't see it on the camera because it's too small, but you saw the green arrows previously, and I would use the arrows to help you place the ruler consistently. Now, even though I've checked the top, vertical position is a 1/4 inch down, and I move the ruler to the right forward, I'm still going to take the spacing gauge or measuring gauge and make sure the ruler's in the right spot. And I might start stitching part of the way and the ruler moves. That's when I double check the arrows, I bring out the measuring gauge, and I double check my ruler position because the ruler can shift in the middle of stitching. Sometimes we might have the ruler at the top correct, but at the bottom, it's not completely vertical. We gave it a little lean left or right. So you want to make sure that it is vertical and not on a diagonal direction in any way. So you double check. You stitch and make sure again that you're using a stitch per inch that's at least 12, or the machine is stitching faster than you are moving the fabric to get a nice smooth stitching in the ribbon design. That's how you do it. You just have to practice. And I recommend that you do it over and over again. You are learning different techniques. This is week 4. And so you have learned how to use the measuring gauge. You've learned how to position the ruler and move it. You've learned how to mark your quilt sandwich. You've learned how to use the measuring gauge for checking, which you see I'm checking. I'm not taking for granted that I put it in the right spot. Remember, there are a lot of variables that happen while we are stitching. One is, as we stitch, we know that the fabric can start to migrate inward. So you want to be careful to check as you stitch. Sometimes rushing through something only means that we have a mistake, an error that needs to be taken out with a seam ripper. And all we had to do was just slow down and double check to make sure the ruler was in the right position. Just take your time. It's not a difficult pattern once you learn the technique. And it is a beautiful, beautiful pattern when it's filled out a nice big area, which is what I recommend. This is how ribbon can look when it's over a larger area. It's so beautiful. I love the texture. Now, my ribbon is not perfect. There's some gaps, there's some overlap, but that's okay. You can have blending thread to minimize those hiccups, if you will. But either way, this is how you learn and practice. So go from a small quilt sandwich, then to a larger one. In this example, I used a 1/2 of a fat 1/4. You can try it on a whole fat 1/4, and then you will be ready for a larger quilt project. So what do you think about ribbon? This is a new technique that we haven't tried before, where we're shifting the ruler in 2 different directions. We're shifting it forward and we're shifting it down to create the design. I'm so glad that you're in this Essential Ruler Quilting Challenge. You are picking up some wonderful design techniques. I hope you got that. Not only are you getting better at quilting with rulers, but you are learning design techniques that you can use with other rulers. We have a few more designs to share, and I think you're going to like them.